Self-driving vehicles. Safety of self-driving vehicles kind of remains in the eye of the beholder, according to Automotive News. Dozens of companies are rolling out hundreds of automated cars and trucks on public roads across the U.S. It's hard for me to believe that we have no national standard for this yet, and yet we're already putting self-driving cars on the highway. Like, that to me is very difficult to believe. Because there is a very, almost like a strange sort of ethereal teamwork that goes along with driving, and computers do not know how to do that. So how do we deal with this? And plus, all 50 states probably have either different ideas and regulations about this or none at all. So I wanted to bring on civil attorney Quentin Brogdon. He's from Dallas, Texas. He's had more than 30 years of courtroom experience, and he's also a former prosecutor, so he kind of sees this from both sides. Quentin, thanks for coming on. How are you?
Good morning, Leland. How are you?
I'm good. I don't like self-driving cars. I'm not trying to be angry old man, get off my lawn. It's just that I love to drive. I love the autonomy of it, and I don't trust the data collection, and I don't trust the idea that some unseen powered-up grid would be operating the traffic flow, which could easily be hacked by terrorists and cause all sorts of melee. The more we automate our country, the more susceptible we are to things like what happened to Capital One Bank. So I'm very, color me skeptical, if you will. I do see uses for them. I think old people over 75 who need to test for their driver's license every year could remain autonomous by having a self-driving car once they've lost their ability to actually drive themselves. But other than that, I want as few of them on the road as possible. Am I weird? Am I strange? Am I unique in that way?
Well, we know that they crash. There have been a whole series of spectacular crashes, and they crash because they don't always see well if the lines are painted in the road and they're not there because the road's been resurfaced or it's raining. They make assumptions about other drivers. The early ones assumed all the other drivers would follow all the traffic laws. What could be wrong with that?
Right.
And they tune out certain things, overhead structures, so that they don't slam on the brakes when you're driving down the freeway under an overpass. But at least 2 people have been decapitated when their self-driving cars went up under trailers that were in their path, apparently because the system thought it was a bridge or an overpass over them. So we know they crash, and the only question is how tolerant are we going to be in the short term as they crash and people are killed to get to the, quote-unquote, better place. We know most car crashes are caused by human error, and the pitch in favor of these is that it's going to take human error out of the equation, but all kinds of other errors have been introduced in the process.
Yeah. You were mentioning the overpasses. I rented a car for a trip a while back, and I was doing about 70 on the interstate. Fortunately, there wasn't a lot of cars around me. I went under an overpass. A car was going across the overpass at the same time I went under. My car thought that car was going to broadside me, and it had the crash mitigation, and it slowed me down. And had there been a semi-truck or somebody on my tailgating me or anything like that, that could have been a disaster. And that was just the crash mitigation. I had no control over that. There's nothing I could do. The car decided to slow down despite the fact that there was no danger. It could not tell the difference between an overpass and somebody broadsiding me at an intersection. That was pretty scary.
Yeah, these when they work well, they work well. But when they don't work well, they really don't work well, and people die. And we're in a beta testing phase, if you will. And if you're beta testing a cell phone and it crashes, you lose your data. If you're beta testing an automated vehicle and something goes wrong, you potentially lose your behind. So it's a very different thing. And the question you raised is, how do we need to handle this with regulation and elsewhere? I think our existing regime can adapt. Some are saying, well, we need to coddle this new industry and put in all these protections and just kind of let it be the Wild West where they get out on the roadways and because it's a young industry and they need to be coddled, in essence.
Yeah.
I, for one, and others, some others at least, believe that our existing legal system can adapt and should adapt, and you need legal accountability. If somebody designs one of these and it causes a death because of a defect in the design or how it's operated or used, and you're not instructed, Tesla, some argue, don't teach you enough how that this really truly not a self-driving vehicle. You can take your hands off the wheel for limited periods of time only in a Tesla, but it's marketed, many would argue, with the idea you can just leave your hands off the wheel for extended periods of time. So I think there needs to be legal accountability when companies create dangerous situations and lives are lost.
Well, part of the problem is that, especially with this sort of hybrid version of automated cars that we have with the Tesla, and I've been arguing this for a while, the safer we make cars, the worse we make drivers. And we're still in that place where drivers ultimately will have to take over at some point. But when the driver that takes over will be dumb and will not have been paying attention to what was happening. And a perfect example, I mentioned rental cars. My wife and I just went to Montana last week or a couple weeks ago. We rented a car. And, the speed limits out there are much higher than they are here in Kentucky. I mean, we're talking, 75, 80 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour in Montana. And the cruise control on this vehicle would automatically, like if you got what the car thought was too close to the car in front of you, it would slow you down. And it would just adjust your, to whatever. But what I noticed was that the distance it was allowing between vehicles, there were many times when it caused the car to slam on the brakes because there was shifting lane issues ahead, And all this stuff is, I'm going to tell my wife, I'm like, look, I'm the one that's driving, and if I'm paying attention, I have my hands on the wheel, and I'm setting the speed, then I ended up just killing the cruise control. I didn't even put it on there because I can drive better by estimating, hey, what's that guy in that lane going to do? I can predict better than that car's computer can. What's that guy in that lane going to do? Why is this guy going so slow? When should I hit the brakes? When should I, merge into the next lane over, etc.? That car had no clue. And yet it was actually, in a sense, kind of driving itself. There were times when it almost lulled me to sleep. When I was just like, oh, okay. Oh, look, I'm doing 70 because this guy in front of me is driving slow in the left-hand lane. And, oh, look, he does have an Ohio plate. You know what I mean? So when I could have gone around him and made better time and all this stuff, it doesn't take that stuff into account. And drivers become dumb because they become lulled to sleep by these safety features.
You're right, and it's an open question whether the designers of these systems will be, nimble enough, if you will, to keep the drivers engaged and alert. Because right now, at best, they're really only partially autonomous. And for instance, Tesla, again, if you're in a crash and when there have been crashes, Tesla puts the blame back on the driver and says, well, the system was beeping at you to put your hands back on the wheel. But anybody who has sat in a hospital room and heard the alarms beeping and seen the nurses and even the loved ones ignoring those alarms because they start to become white noise understands that's how it works with human beings.
Yeah.
And so if we can let our guard down some of the time, what's going to wake us up and let us know, okay, now I need to be super vigilant this very second because I'm getting ready to crash into a concrete barrier.
Yeah. Well, that white noise is exactly what happened to me when I backed into my dad's car. He had come to visit and parked in a place that I didn't expect him to park. And I was leaving for work the next morning, and I forgot. He was supposed to arrive that day, but instead arrived the night before, so I forgot he was even there. When I back out of my garage, it's got the double doors. It's two separate bays, and as I'm backing out of one of my, my bay where my truck is, it always beeps at me because it thinks the garage door side is too close to the vehicle. So I'm used to it. Well, I backed right in my dad's car because I didn't pay attention to the fact that it was beeping for the thing behind me as opposed to the thing that was beside me. But in all fairness, though, you take the self-driving cars, and even the Teslas and the others, they have spectacular accidents, but aren't they fewer than the spectacular accidents that are human-caused?
Well, it depends how you measure them. Statistics are funny things. And if you measure simply by mileage, which is what the designers and creators of the systems want to do, they're going on big stretches of highway and they're not doing as much city driving. So
right.
If you just look at mileage, some would say you're comparing apples to oranges instead of apples to apples.
Right.
Alternative comparisons are comparing specific scenarios. If something darts out from behind a tree, how many times would a human driver hit it versus the computer? But probably the best, I think, system to compare these is just sheer numbers of crashes and deaths. And yes, ultimately they're going to be much safer, but in the short term, I think, and many others think, including the Center for Automotive Safety, they're being overhyped and the drivers of these are being lulled into a false sense of security.
Yeah, I totally agree. At some point, you're always going to have to be able and want to be able to take over the self-driving car. But if you're out of the game, so to speak, just like a player that's been standing on the sidelines and doesn't know the flow and the nuances of the game, you're going to be much more dangerous when you do take over. Thanks, Quentin. Appreciate the time. We'll keep an eye on all this. We appreciate you coming on with us.
Thank you, Leland. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one. All right, Quentin Brogdon, civil attorney, News Radio 840 WHAS.